What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to TTP Sports. And the NFL draft weekend wrapped up yesterday. And honestly, it felt like just a very weird weekend from an Eagles fan's perspective because there were so many trades, getting out of rounds for Howie Roseman, stockpiling more picks for the Eagles for next season. Just kind of felt like the overall philosophy for this draft for the Eagles, they maybe didn't have that much faith in the talent of this draft, but the Eagles, they still selected a bunch of dudes in this draft. Also, once again, another situation where a player falls to the Eagles, and the NFL world is like, oh my God, how the hell does Howie Roseman keep getting away with this? You just can't keep getting away with this. A person that was projected to be top 10, top 15 in the first round of this draft falls to 31, and the Eagles trade up one pick with the Kansas City Chiefs to scoop him up. They do it again. They do it again. Also, kind of felt like they were prioritizing a lot of the defensive side in this draft, which makes a lot of sense. You lost a lot of bodies on the defensive side, so you're trying to look for replacements in certain areas. So, I didn't know if they had like a full philosophy going into this draft. I don't know if they had full faith in the talent in this draft. They drafted guys, they traded out at some rounds, they, had a lot of fifth round and sixth round picks in this draft, and then they also accumulated some draft capital for next year's draft as well. So, overall, like I said a couple of days ago, I'm not gonna, go through the X's and O's. I don't look through the all 32 film of all of these prospects. I have no idea. I could just go by what the experts say, and a lot of the experts say the Eagles had a very solid draft, especially in the top part of this draft, especially when you have somebody like Jahad Campbell, a linebacker from Alabama, fall to you, where he's basically expected to be a high first round pick, and with his torn labrum surgery, maybe that scared a couple of teams off. It's also a fun story as well, where you have a guy from South Jersey, from Gloucester County, and grows up loving Brian Dawkins, grows up, his family, bunch of Eagles fans, and you get drafted by your hometown team. That's like always a fun story at the end of the day. I also think that one of the quarterbacks they drafted in the later stages of this draft is also, a Philadelphia area native. So, a couple of cool stories right there just overall. So, no, interesting weekend for the Birds. Definitely interesting. But before we get into the rest of discussing today's topics, everybody, what's going on? Welcome back to TTP Sports. If you were new to the channel, I recommend that you do hit that subscribe button. It does me such a great deal of service. You can also use the code TTP Sports, $20 off your first purchase at SEATGEEK. It's a great deal. Do not pass it up. You can also leave a follow at TTP Sports on TikTok and Instagram for all the short content. You can also drop a like and leave a comment in the comment section down below on the video. Always appreciate when people do that. So, getting into today's business, the NFL draft is basically wrapped up yesterday, and just going over the Eagles standpoint, like I said, I'm not going to go too much into that because, like I said, I don't know much of the information in regards to NFL prospects. All I can tell you is from what pundits say, and I just got to go by what the experts and the NFL draft, pundits all say. And like I said, a lot of people do think the Eagles had a very solid draft. Some people really didn't know what the philosophy of Howie Roseman was. Some people didn't like how many times they traded out of certain rounds because everybody in the first round with the Eagles would pick 32. They were expecting Howie Roseman to most likely trade back for a team that was maybe quarterback hungry, and they accumulate some draft capital for the later parts of this draft, and maybe get some draft capital for next year's draft, because that's just something that it sounds like something Howie Roseman would do. But no, actually, they traded up one spot to pick 31 with the Kansas City Chiefs. They traded a fifth round pick along with the 32nd overall pick just to move up that one spot to draft Jahad Campbell, and, not gonna complain about that whatsoever. You're only giving up a fifth round pick in this year's draft, and you had a bolster of those fifth round picks, so you can definitely afford to lose one of those. And maybe it was a situation where, because there was also reports about, the Eagles trying to, talk with many teams, trying to move up in the first round of the draft. There was also a report even before the draft that teams were trying to refuse to take calls from the 215 area code because, oh shit, it's Howie Roseman. I'm not trying to get fleeced here. So many teams probably didn't pick up the phone for Howie Roseman. And I think it was one of the later parts of the first round, like when you get into the 20s, when you get to the Los Angeles Chargers pick. I think there was also rumors that the Eagles were trying to trade up to that pick with the Chargers, but nothing really went through. And I guess you could say the board did fall their way in what they wanted to, and they only had to move up one spot with Kansas City, and they go out and draft Jahad Campbell, a linebacker from Alabama. Obviously, like I said, he's a South Jersey native, so that is a very cool story right there. And, it says he's a linebacker, had some really good stats with Alabama. I'm looking at the ESPN article from Tim McManus, basically just summarizing a lot of these draft picks. So he was a first team All SEC selection last season. He racked up 117 tackles in 2024, primarily playing as an off ball linebacker, but he can also rush the passer and he contributes to an edge rotation. So there was also something that was very interesting at that point when they did draft Jahad Campbell. I think this was from Elliot Shore Parks from WIP, and he basically described the entire thing, how the Eagles don't really view him as a linebacker. They view him as an edge rusher that can play in coverage, that can also play linebacker and switch in those rotations. And it will definitely be very interesting to see what Vic Fangio can do with this kid and see how he can implement him into this defensive rotation and how he could probably utilize him as an edge rusher, because realistically, you lost a lot of bodies last year in the offseason. Well, not last year. You lost a lot of bodies in this offseason. Brandon Graham retires. You lose Josh Sweat. You traded away CJ Gardner Johnson. You lost Milton Williams. You're losing a lot of bodies there. And there's a lot of young, unproven talent that can probably step into those situations, but you're adding more depth when you're adding Jahad Campbell. Now, I don't know if he's going to be ready for training camp and all that stuff with the torn labrum surgery. I'm sure he will be at some point, and I'm not sure he's going to be a day one starter. That really just depends on how training camp and how the healing process goes from his surgery. But it definitely is a very good pick. And once again, it just goes to that certain situation. I feel like it was an NFL Network reporter. I forget what her name was, but she was basically raving about Jahad Campbell as possibly being a steal if he drops in the first round. And then, of course, she goes berserk because she's like, oh my God, how did it happen again? How did it happen again? How did Howie Roseman get a guy that should probably go top 10, should probably go top 15? How do you get him at 31? Howie Roseman just completely finding that magic. It's just Howie season, boys. Howie season. And there definitely were a lot of needs for the Eagles. Like, don't get me wrong, they definitely need to bolster up their defensive front. They got to bolster up their defensive line. You lost a lot of pieces, and something that you needed to prioritize well was edge rusher. And you do get a guy that can primarily play edge rusher and also play linebacker. And Howie Roseman did state that this pick has nothing to do with Kobe Dean's situation with his surgery and his injury recovery. It's just basically about adding depth in basically every spot and getting a guy that is very versatile, that can play edge and can play linebacker, play in pass coverage. And something that this team also needs to prioritize doing is finding ways to rush the quarterback. And granted, they weren't terrible at rushing the quarterback last year, but I also do think Eagles fans are so enamored by the 2022 campaign where they got 70 plus sacks, and that's just something that's never going to happen again. I feel like, and that's just something that's not Vic Fangio's scheme. They really don't pressure the quarterback that much. They really don't blitz the quarterback that much. So I think that's just something that Eagles fans have been so used to for so many years, and especially with 2022, you're getting 70 plus sacks, and then you get into a Vic Fangio rotation where you're not throwing the blitz that much. I think people just want to see a lot of sacks. And yeah, if you could definitely find a way to utilize Jahad Campbell as an edge rusher, as somebody that can go and attack the quarterback along with Nolan Smith, along with Jalen Carter, along with some of these other young names, Jalen Hunt and all that stuff in this defensive front, definitely you get as much help as possible. And then you also have a guy that can just find a way to rotate into the linebacker position when maybe some guys need a break. When if Nakobe Dean comes back healthy, you got a situation right there that can really help there. Zach Bond, if he needs a break for a series or something like that. I'm not sure if Jeremiah Trotter is going to get a little bit more of a look if Nakobe Dean's not ready to start the season. So you really have a lot of situations of where you could go here. If Nakobe Dean's not ready, this Jahad Campbell is your day one starting linebacker. So there's a lot of ways that Vic Fangio can go in this, but overall, it's a really good pick. It's a really good pick, and I'm excited to see what Jahad Campbell can do. And his reaction to being drafted, like when his name was called, his celebration going down the hallway, getting his Eagles hat and all that stuff. It's just a very fun story, especially a kid that grew up in South Jersey. So it's always fun. So I wonder if that gives him another chip on his shoulder to go out there and perform, his first game in the link and all that stuff. I'm sure that'll be a very, very exciting time. And there's also a little bit more info here from Tim McManus in the article, basically just summarizing every draft pick. So he also brings the question, will he start as a rookie? And Tim McManus writes, it depends on where he's deployed. Of one, off-ball linebacker Nakobe Dean is still recovering from his torn patellar tendon, so there likely will be an opening opposite of Zach Bond at the beginning of the season. He would be competing with players like Jeremiah Trotter Jr. for that post. If he plays in more of a hybrid edge role, it would probably not be as a starter initially, though he can certainly be a part of the rotation. So that definitely does make sense in that situation. And, he also writes what we're hearing about Campbell. So here you got a quote from Howie Roseman right here. That was really an easy pick. That was a top 10 player on our board, said general manager Howie Roseman, who added that the organization had no concerns about his long-term health. Campbell underwent left shoulder surgery to repair a torn labrum after the NFL scouting combine. Roseman confirmed that the Eagles made efforts to try to trade up for Campbell earlier in the draft as well, showing just how hot they were after him. They finally struck a deal with the Kansas City Chiefs to go from 32 to 31 to ensure that they landed him. Yeah, and I think one of the rumors was as well that they were trying to trade up to the Chargers pick in the early 20s, but nothing went around there. There was also like talk about them possibly trading with the Packers and all that stuff. There was a bunch of rumors that the Eagles trying to trade up in this draft, and just nothing really happened until you traded from 32 to 31. So that was definitely a little bit of the intriguing parts there. So, and I do have the transaction list from the Eagles on their website, and there's a boatload of them from this draft, so I'll definitely bring that up as we, continue on with this pod. I just find it very funny. I just found it very funny how many trades that they did make in this draft. So, in round two, after, a little bit of trades here, honestly, let's look at some of the trades that they did make. So, obviously, they traded the 32nd pick for 31, and also a 5th round pick went to Kansas City at the same time. So, to get Jahad Campbell, they had their 2nd round pick. They acquired a 3rd round pick and a 2026 5th round pick from the Falcons in exchange for a 2025 3rd round pick, which was the 96th overall pick. They also acquired a 2025 4th round pick, 111 overall, and the 130th overall pick, and a 6th round pick, which was 191 overall from the Denver Broncos in exchange for pick number 101 and pick number 134. They also got pick number 145 and pick number 207 from the Jets in exchange for, pick number 130. And then they eventually made the rest of their picks. It was just, so many trades and so much moving back for the Eagles is actually very funny. So, with their 2nd round pick, number 64 overall, they drafted Andrew Mukaba, a safety from Texas. And obviously, you needed to replace the safety position. You lost CJ Gardner-Johnson. And this definitely sounds like a guy that can maybe fill in and maybe start day one. A lot of people are very high on this pick as well. So maybe you got a young guy there replacing CJ Gardner-Johnson that can also take away the ball, because he did have 5 interceptions last year for the SEC, which led the SEC for Texas. So that's a very good trend, and hopefully it's somebody that can just, come in and fill those shoes of CJ Gardner-Johnson. And here's the take from Tim McManus right here. The Eagles lost a couple of defensive backs this offseason. They traded CJ Gardner-Johnson to the Texans, and Darius Slay Jr., he signed with the Steelers. Mukaba, a 4-year starter at the college level, helps replenish a young, talented defensive backfield led by Quinyon Mitchell and Super Bowl standout Cooper DeJean. Mukaba played both safety and nickel in college. It'll be interesting to see how defensive coordinator Vic Fangio plans to deploy him to take advantage of his playmaking abilities. Mukaba, 6 foot, 185 pounds, is on the smaller side for a safety. So yeah, it definitely will be interesting to see what Vic Fangio does there, and is also a key stat as well. Mukaba had an SEC leading 5 interceptions in 2024. If that trend continues into the pros, it will help offset the loss of CJ Gardner-Johnson, who had 12 picks during his 2 seasons in Philadelphia. The starting safety spot opposite Reed Blankenship is currently up for grabs. The Eagles want to give 2023 3rd round pick Sidney Brown a crack at the job, but also want to add competition, which Mukaba provides. So yeah, I don't know if he's going to be a day one starter. Obviously, like Tim McMahon says, it's going to be a competition with him and Sidney Brown. Maybe Sidney Brown is the starting day one safety outside of Reed Blankenship. So it's definitely something we'll be able to see. But it is interesting that you got a guy that also has the playmaking ability to take the ball away and give it back to the offense. So that's something that's very interesting right there. And then we're just really going to go through the rest of the board because this is when the Eagles are just constantly trading all their picks, and they definitely had, very, very high philosophy of just drafting a bunch of defensive guys to replenish a lot of the places lost. They also did draft some guys on the offensive side. They drafted a center in the 5th round. They drafted a quarterback in round 6, an offensive tackle in round number 6 as well. So definitely some interesting things right there. So their first 4th round pick that they drafted, well, the only 4th round pick that they drafted, number 111 overall, was Ty Robinson, the defensive tackle from Nebraska. Tim McManus writes the Eagles will continue to address positions where they incurred losses earlier this offseason with Milton Williams leaving in free agency. Robinson will help solidify a defensive tackle rotation headlined by Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. Robinson's 15 tackles for loss in 2024 was the most by a Nebraska player since Ndamukong Suh in 2009. I don't know why I couldn't pronounce his name. He comes in with plenty of reps under his belt after starting 47 games at the college level. His athleticism showed up at the NFL Combine as well. He ran the fastest 40-yard dash among defensive tackles at 4.83 seconds. So definitely an interesting thing right there. Knowing the Eagles, this guy will probably find a way to be a stud. That's just the way the Eagles have been going the past few years with drafts. And a 5th round pick. So basically getting into the 5th round pick, they had 3 picks in the 5th round that they made, and they also had 3 picks in the 6th round, it looks like. So, actually, 4 picks in the 6th round, so they had a lot of draft picks right here. So a guy in the 5th round, the first guy, number 145 overall, Mac McWilliams, great name, a cornerback from Central Florida. Tim McManus writes, Philadelphia adds another piece to its young and promising cornerback room. The departure of veteran Darius Slay left an opening on the outside corner. Cooper DeJean, one of the standouts from Super Bowl 59, could make the move after playing last year in the slot, which would create a need at nickel. McWilliams, 5'10", 191 pounds, who played both outside and inside at UCF, ran a 4.41 and a 4.41 second 40-yard dash at the combine, might be a candidate for that role. He creates more options in a quarterback room led by DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, and that also features Adoree Jackson and Keely Ringo. So interesting pick right there. They also have a pick at 161 overall, Samal Mondon Jr., linebacker from Georgia, another Georgia prospects, so just keep bringing in those Georgia guys. Tim McManus writes, yet another Bulldog makes his way to Philly, joining the likes of Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, Keely Ringo, and Nolan Smith Jr. on the defensive side of the ball. A 2-time national champion, Mondon was a 3-year starter at Georgia and saw time at inside linebacker, outside linebacker, and nickel. He missed 4 games in 2024 with a foot injury. He could be a special teams contributor and perhaps vie for some reps at linebacker as Dean recovers from the torn patella tendon. So interesting stuff right there. In the 5th round, number 168 overall, Drew Kendall. This was their last pick of the 5th round. He's a center from Boston College. Tim McManus writes, the Eagles finally select an offensive player and unsurprisingly go with their bread and butter O-line Kendall, first team all ACC in 2024, started 37 games at center for Boston College and tested well at the NFL Scouting Combine with the fastest short settle time among offensive linemen. It'll be interesting to see whether they try him at guard, seeing as the starting center position belongs to Cam Jurgens. If nothing else, Kendall can provide some depth. We'll see what Jeff Statlin can do with him. Most likely, he'll probably find a way to try to convert him to right guard. I did see some stuff on Twitter about Kendall saying that a lot of the pundits say that he's primarily a center. He really hasn't played any other position, so Jeff Statlin will find a way. Jeff Statlin will find a way. Then you got their first pick in the 6th round, number 181 overall, Kyle McCord, a quarterback from Syracuse. Tim McManus writes, the Eagles continue to invest in the quarterback position, even with the franchise signal caller Jalen Hurts in the fold. McCord led the FBS in passing yards and set the ACC single-season passing yards record for 4,779 yards in his lone season with the Orange after leaving Ohio State for Syracuse. The Philadelphia native threw 34 touchdowns to 12 interceptions last year. Philadelphia traded Kenny Pickett to the Browns this offseason, even with a lot of faith in the pack of Tanner McKee. The Eagles always want to make sure their quarterback room is as stacked as possible. Quarterback factory. Quarterback factory. Another pick in the 6th round, 191st overall from Denver. This is one of their picks that they got from Denver. Miles Hinton, an offensive tackle from Michigan. Tim McManus writes, Hinton brings some position versatility. He started 20 games at right tackle and 11 games at left tackle across 5 seasons in college. O-line coach Jeff Stoutland is widely considered the best in the business and will look to optimize the player, obviously, who can shoot for the role of swing tackle if he makes the team. So just a rotational piece right there. Then you got pick number 207, Cameron Williams, a tackle from Texas. Tim McManus writes, the Eagles get a developmental offensive lineman who played mostly right tackle at Texas. Philadelphia has invested a couple of picks now on tackles with the upside in later rounds. It's a good bet O-line coach Jeff Stoutland will get the most of them as the Eagles search for depth and the best case scenario look to hit on an eventual replacement for standout veterans Lane Johnson. Williams said he dealt with an injury this past season that caused his heel to lock up and required surgery. And their last pick of the 6th round, number 209 overall, Antoine Powell-Ryland, an edge from Virginia Tech. Tim McManus writes, Philly gets a productive edge rusher late in round 6. Powell-Ryland finished 3rd in the FBS last season with 16 sacks and has 25.5 takedowns overall in the last 2 years. The Eagles opened their draft by selecting Jahad Campbell, the Alabama standout who figured to play on the edge, a good amount for the defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, and bookend by taking another pass rush option in Powell-Ryland. Not a bad idea after losing Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham this offseason. So, obviously, like I said, it's a lot of lottery tickets when you have these late round draft picks, but the Eagles have been very good at developing some late round draft picks the past couple of seasons, especially if you get some offensive tackles and some offensive line players under Jeff Stoutland. He'll find a way to make those guys productive in some way, even if they're just a rotational type of piece. And I think it will also be nice to see if, Brandon Graham, since he is retired, maybe he still stands on the Eagles sidelines, try to give some mentoring to some of these young players, especially a lot of these young defensive players, and especially since you got a lot of guys that play the edge, that can play on the defensive line, that can maybe rotate into those slots. So maybe it'll be very beneficial to have Brandon Graham there mentoring a lot of young people that are moving to different positions that they maybe never have played before, and Brandon Graham can give him that, mentorship right there, because he's a guy that experienced a lot of success, going to a position that he never played before on that defensive front. So overall, like I said, I cannot judge this draft because I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert whatsoever. As you could see, I'm reading from a Tim McManus article on ESPN. So overall, I do like some of the picks. I am excited for some of the picks. I'm excited to see how some of the Eagles coaches are going to work with some of these players. Jahad Campbell, a guy that was expected probably in the top 10, top 15, falls to you. You always should be getting excited about that. You're just adding a lot of depth to your defense, especially in areas that you lost a lot of bodies. And that's basically what you needed to do. And you also did acquire some draft capital in 2026, like Howie Roseman always likes to do. And, trading out of certain rounds like Howie Roseman did in this draft, maybe there's also views that he didn't view the talent in this draft as deep as maybe some in previous years. And, Howie Roseman just likes to always accumulate more draft capital so he can just use that down the road for future endeavors. So, like I said, I'm no expert here, but overall, I think Eagles fans probably should be satisfied with this draft. But, there's going to be pundits out there. There's going to be people that look into the draft a lot more. Maybe they're not happy with some of the picks. Maybe they're just not happy that Howie Roseman traded out of the certain rounds so many times. Oh, man. It would have been very funny if you're eventually in the first round, that is, because of how long that first round took. If you're finally getting to the 30s, when it's like almost midnight at that point, and then the Eagles trade out of the first round, you're like, I stayed up for basically nothing. Always a funny reaction if that was going to be the case. We do have a voicemail here, though, from Sean. He left this yesterday after the draft ended, so I'm sure Sean's going to give his little summary on what he thinks about this draft. So we'll get to Sean's comment here, and then we'll end it off with this pod. So let's get to Sean, see what he has to say. Let me turn the volume up right here so I don't forget about that. Let's go on here.
So the Eagles NFL draft portion is finally over. I mean, for me, overall, I think it was okay. I think giving any team a draft grade when these guys haven't taken the field is a bit ridiculous. But I think the Eagles got guys that can help them. obviously, by all the times he moved down the board, I think Roseman was telling you what he thought of the 2025 draft as a whole. It really wasn't that talented. So, again, you got a line. Your first two picks should step in and possibly both start. I mean, in picking where they were picking, I think that's a pretty good thing. The final thing I'll say is thank you, Cleveland Browns, because nothing against Shedeur Sanders' talent or lack thereof, but why would you want to bring that drama onto this club? Why would you want to deal with that, nonsense on a daily basis? I don't understand it. Let it be Cleveland's problem and not ours. I don't think any of these quarterbacks not named Cam Ward is worth a shit anyway. So good luck to Shedeur, but ply your trade in Cleveland. I'll take Tanner McKee.
That was something I did want to bring up as well with the Shedeur Sanders thing. That was crazy how far he fell in this draft. Even though ESPN was basically sucking his dick, I guess you could say, just to put it lightly. Um, I know he probably was projected originally to be in a first round pick quarterback, but he fell down the board so far. What was it? The fourth round he finally got drafted by the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns actually jumped the Eagles spot to go and draft Shedeur Sanders, and that's very weird because didn't Cleveland draft a quarterback earlier in the draft as well? So that is just weird. That is just very weird. I know there's a lot of rumors about Sanders and his attitude, and maybe his draft interviews didn't go over so well, and maybe just a lot of people don't want to deal with the drama with him and his father. That definitely is understandable. So it's definitely something you don't want to bring into a locker room, especially like the Eagles. I jokingly said, "Oh, just draft Sanders just so you could have the quarterback factory meme." Oh man, I don't know how that was just weird. That was just crazy. Then you also have the Giants trading up in the late part of the first round to go and draft Jackson Dart, which a lot of people were thinking, oh, the Giants are trading up to draft Sanders. Nope, they drafted Jackson Dart, which is probably someone they could have gotten in the second round or possibly something like that. So I don't know. I don't know. The Giants are very high on this guy. A lot of Giants fans are like, "Oh yeah, Jackson Dart, all that stuff." I'm not worried. I'm not worried. They did draft Abdul Carter. The Cowboys did draft some intriguing pieces. Same thing with the Commanders. So I think the NFC East overall probably had a very solid drafting experience this weekend. But yeah, what Sean said, yeah, it's very hard to like go right here and just outright grade the drafts before these guys even step on the field. Kind of that's where the boat I am because I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert, so I really can't grade anything here. So overall, we'll see how these guys turn out. But yeah, I definitely think you have possibly a couple of day one starters with Campbell and Makuba in this draft. So we'll see where everything goes, everybody. So want to hear your thoughts on the entire draft. Did you like the draft? Eagles perspective? Did you not like the Eagles picks? Did you think Howie Roseman traded back once too many times? Want to hear your thoughts, so don't forget to leave a comment in the comment section down below. Don't forget to drop a like, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It does me a great deal of service. You can also use the code TTPSPORTS, $20 off your first purchase at SeatGeek. Great deal, don't pass it up. And also leave a follow on TTP Sports on TikTok and Instagram for real shorts and all the good stuff. So thanks guys for tuning in. I'll see you later tonight for Phillies.